Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this video, we are going to be talking about color theory, color mixing with watercolors, and we're going to just practice a bunch of exercises that can help you get familiar with how to use color in watercolors. So if you want to find out some exercises that can help you get familiar with your colors and create better art as a result, stay tuned. Let's get started. Okay, so the color theory basics, I always recommend to everybody repeatedly to get one of these pocket wheels. These are great, and I'll show you that when on my demo screen. It includes lots of tools, color calculators, or ways that you can figure out how to mix. It talks about color schemes and lingo. And so this is a great tool that you should have in your toolbox. They're about $5 or $6. You can get them at most craft and hobby stores and online. So consider this this wheel. Okay, that's my spiel. Now, first of all, with color theory, all colors are made up of the three primary, which is red, blue, and yellow. And you can see that when you see printers, how they just have the, well, they used to have just the three colors. They've gotten a little bit more advanced now. But before, they could make up all the colors that they needed to with those three primary colors. And what that means is that there's no colors that you mix together to create red. Now, you can add other colors to red to change the shade of red, but you're not going to create red unless you start with red. So red, and that's the same for yellow and blue. Now, to get the secondary colors, you mix any two primary colors and you'll get a secondary color. So now I know we kind of learned this in kindergarten, right? But this is just, we're going to take it another level. So you mix any primary colors and you get the secondary color. That includes orange, green, and violet. So those are the secondary colors. And then the tertiary colors are when you mix any of the secondary colors together with one of the primary colors, then you'll get these secondary colors. Now, if you see any colors that are hyphenated, if they're called red orange or yellow green, any of those hyphenated names, you got a pretty good idea that these are the tertiary level of colors. Now, likely you're going to see them named something else. They're going to be named, I don't know, apple green or something like that, depending on what you're using. But watercolors typically don't name them like that. They name their colors based on the mineral that they're created from, or they might have a marketing name based on whatever manufacturer it is. So sometimes they will have like red violet or red orange, or they'll have something that's like phthalo blue red shade, for example. So they do help you out to understand what the color scheme is, or the color tends to be. Now, there are warm and cool colors. Red and yellow are both warm colors, and blue is a cool color. And even within the color wheel, there are cool colors, like the green, blue, and violet colors are more the cool colors. And then the red, orange, yellow are the warmer colors. And then within those, there's a warm blue and a cool blue, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. I don't want to confuse you right now, but they're all relative to each other, right? Now we can say that that orange is warm, but if we look at this red versus the red orange, we can say that this is warmer than this color. So they're all relatively warm to each other as well. And like I said, I'll mention that a little bit further along this in more detail. If you mix all the primary colors together, you get basically a black. You get kind of a muddy gray black color. And of course, it depends on which three colors you're using, because each of us have a different palette of red, yellow, and blues. And they can do different things when they mix together, which we will talk about as well. Some of the lingo that you might hear me mention: hue is the color name. So red, blue, yellow, etc. Value is relative light to dark. We talked about that last time when we were talking about techniques. We practiced creating different values, and that's just with watercolor, you just basically dilute the pigment so that you get more of the white showing through, and you can see going from a very pale value to very dark, the dark value of that pigment. The darkest value, of course, is black, and the lightest value is white. Intensity is relative bright to dull. So the more saturated in pigment, the brighter it's going to be. And if you can dull a color by adding either a complement color or like a black or a gray or something that mutes the color. So, and each color has its own brightness as well. Tint is when you add white to a color. Now in watercolor, it's not like acrylics. In acrylics, you actually add white paint to the acrylic paint to get the tint. But in watercolor, because it's a transparent medium, oftentimes instead of adding white, we just leave more of the white showing through of the paper. So we just dilute the pigment down so that you see more of the white, and then you get a tint of that color. And that's just a lighter, more pastel of that color. And you can add white, but white tends to be chalky, tends to have some opacity, and it can make it a little bit chalky looking. So you can do that if you want a more opaque color and you want it pastel, you can absolutely add white. But typically, I would suggest starting with just practicing adjusting your pigment concentration. As far as toning it down, you hear that term, toning it down. If you add gray to a color, that tones it down. Well, in watercolor, we can create gray by mixing the complementary colors, because basically if you mix all three of these colors together, right, the primary colors, you get a shade of black, some kind of gray to black. So if you mix, say, this red with the complementary color, this green, which is already a mix of the blue and yellow, you're going to tone down the red. You're going to get kind of a gray color. You're going to basically neutralize that color. So instead of adding a black, which could actually muddy the color and reduce the vibrant, or well, it's going to reduce the vibrancy, and so is the complementary color, but it might look more natural if you just add complementary color instead of adding a black or gray. In this case, for the tone, it's gray. If you want to get a shade of the color, you add black. Well, in this case, just add more of the complementary color. So we're going to show you some ways to tone it down, to tint it up, to shade it down without necessarily adding the gray or the black, because that's not as common to do in watercolor as it would be with an opaque medium like acrylics. All right, here are some examples of some of the Harmonious color schemes, and this is on that color wheel. So I mentioned the opposite colors on the wheel are complementary colors. When used together, they brighten each other up. They make each other pop because they're good contrast colors. That's why you'll see like Christmas colors or green and red. They're really just, they make each other a little bit louder by working together. So you can see how these red flowers just pop against the green background. Now, in order to get this in watercolor, I had to mask or keep those areas white and then put the green down. I had to make sure not to paint green all around, because if I laid that red over the top of green, then you're going to see some of that green come through and it's going to muddy it down. You'll notice at the base of the flowers, there's a shadow. The shadow side of the flowers, that's done by adding that complementary color, that green, to create that kind of muted gray tone. And it makes a really nice shade color for that red. But like I said, you have to keep those areas white in order to get that red to pop like that, or else it'll be subdued when it's mixed, when it's laid over the top of green. You'll understand more when we talk about how to mix and how to glaze. The next Harmonious color scheme is Analogous, and that's three colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. And this is not these three colors, but it's the yellows, oranges, and reds, right? And then I also did, for an accent, not as part of the main color theme, but I did as an accent, I did some of that complementary blue, and that gives this nice shadow contrast there for those warm red tones. So the more harmonious color schemes, or the analogous, not harmonious, the more analogous or monochromatic color schemes are very calming and relaxing. They just give a different energy than you're going to get from doing the complementary color. The next example that I have is the Triad, and this is an example of that. It has it's very vibrant in colors, and, you know, a variety of colors, and they just really make each other, you know, come alive together. So there are some more color schemes that I'm not going to talk about, but it is on that color wheel, and you can also find other ways to get inspired by color, and I'll talk about that at the end. All right, so choosing your colors that you want to have in your palette, the minimum you're going to want, of course, are those 3 primary colors. But typically, I would recommend having basically like a 12 colored palette, having a warm and cool of each of those primary colors. So here's an example of my palette. I have a warm and cool yellow. I have a warm and cool red. I have a violet. I don't have warm and cool of violet, although my indigo is kind of like a deep, that's sort of kind of falls in that category. I call that sort of a neutral, because I use that for shading. I have warm and cool blue, warm and cool green, and then I have a couple earth tones. So this is yellow ochre, which is my warm earth tone, and then kind of a cooler earth tone. And you might be looking at these going, I don't know what's cool or warm or what that means, but I'm going to help you figure that out in just a second. But I did want to show you that this is a palette of colors that are available of M-Gram. That's the one I primarily use. This is Winsor Newton, and you can see they have a different selection of colors in their palette. So you can get a variety of yellows and a variety of reds and blues and greens. And so there are so many choices out there. So how do you pick which one to get? And hopefully this guide will help you. It's kind of confusing at first, but basically this is 90 of the most common colors. It includes the color index, which I talked about last week. That's that color pigment makeup of it. So pigment, so PY 35, for example, or this PY 97 for this Hansa yellow. That's the color index, or that's the pigment that's used. It designates a certain mineral that's used to create that color. Now, one thing I did discover recently that you should be aware of, because I talked about how do you find or match colors, and you can use these color indexes to help you. But what I also discovered is that some colors have one pigment that's made up of several different colors. Sorry, I'm not saying that correctly. One color index is used in a variety of colors, and it's the only mineral used, but maybe that mineral, and I'm not sure why, but my guess is that some minerals are, you know, might have a range of colors that they can create. For example, copper, when it oxidizes, it can be green, it can be browns, reds, so a range of those colors. So I think that might be what happens here. But for example, raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, this Venetian red, those are all pigment brown 7, even though they look very different. So even if you want to use that color index to match colors, just be aware that there could be a variation. So unless you're getting the exact same manufacturer, the exact same color name with all of the specs the same, it might be a little bit different. Just be aware of that. Now, what I did here is I highlighted these turquoise highlights. Those are some of my colors that are in my palette. So you can see I kind of got a mix around the color wheel. As I move along this wheel, so if I move to the right, this is me adding blue, the next primary color, to this color. So this is yellow. As I move this direction, I'm adding more and more of the next primary color, which in this case is blue. That's over here. So everything in between is a mix of these 2 primary colors. So as I move along the wheel, all of the colors that I'm moving towards are cooler than where I started, because yellow is a very warm color. So everything on this side of that is cooler. And then as I continue to move around, the blues are warmer because they're added to yellow, and then they turn cooler and turn more violet as we come around towards red. Now red is also a warm color, but not quite as warm as the yellow color. So blue becomes cooler as we continue around. We get to violet, and then we start to get warmer and warmer. The violet turns warmer as we get to red, and then it's warmer still as we move towards the yellow. So as we move around the wheel and it moves towards the next primary color, it's going to change the temperature. So The warms are the yellow, orange, reds, and the cools are the greens, blues, and purples. But within those, there's warm and cool of each of those colors, depending on where it falls on this circle. As you go towards the center, it's the more shaded colors of those colors. So these are those deeper colors, maybe added, like this is black. So these are when you start adding, you know, some black hues to it. As you go out, it's a little bit more vibrant colors. So you can find more at the link that's on that page if you want. If you want to go down the deep rabbit hole of color theory. All right, so now let's talk about some of the exercises I'm going to be showing. This is, the first exercise is create a swatch sheet for all of your colors. This will allow you to visually see all the colors in your palette and what they look like on paper. And it's a good idea to go ahead and do a gradient wash like we talked about last time, where you go from a very concentrated color and dilute it until you get the lightest shade. And that way you can see a whole gradient of the color and you know light to dark what it's going to do. Now, this is an example of a design that somebody else had for creating these swatch sheets that has all these details on it. And I thought it was kind of a cool idea. So I'm going to do an example of this later. But this has all of the details about the color here. It does a test for the transparency and permanency. So this, for example, is where you lay down the color and then you lift it with a brush. And this black line is actually a Sharpie. So it's whether or not you can see the Sharpie line below the color. So if it's opaque, it's going to hide more of that Sharpie line than if it's more transparent. So that's the transparency test. And then down here, you can test how it diffuses on wet, because some pigments travel a lot faster and move farther than other pigments, probably based on the weight of the mineral or how finely they are ground up. So this is a way to look at all of the aspects of those. That's very, very detailed. You can simply do basic if you want. If you don't want, if that's too complicated, you can just do the basic swatch here. But I do encourage you to, if you have different manufacturers of paint, to make sure you note those. If it's all the same, you can just put it at the top, just say, okay, Winsor Newton, and then all of them are, you know, Winsor Newton. I would also include the name of the color and then the color index if you want some help. I think that just can help in a variety of ways, because you can find out if it's a single pigment, if it's a mixed pigment. If you were trying to match something, it could help you. So I think that's good information. Just have at your fingertips quickly. All right. The next thing is to practice mixing. We're going to be practicing mixing on the palette, mixing on the paper with wet on wet, and also mixing directly on the brush. So I'm going to demonstrate that. The next exercise would be practicing glazing, which is layering. And this is done by layering one layer down and then letting it dry. You got to let it completely dry. And then you gently lay a next layer down. It can be the same color or a different color. And you want to make sure not to work that brush real hard, because otherwise you'll lift the pigment that's below. You'll start mixing on the paper. And that's not what this is. This is layering over the top of it. So you can see in this example here, this is just laying a swatch down and then letting it dry and then laying another one over. So you can see these areas that are darker. Those are areas where it overlapped and you get that deeper concentration of that color. So if you do this with the same color, you're just getting deeper and deeper layers of that color, and that could just add depth to your subject. Now, if you're doing two different colors, color A might look different over color B than color B looks over color A, if that makes sense. So maybe, for example, if I lay down a red color first and I lay the yellow over, it might be bright orange. But if I lay the yellow down first and then lay red over, I might not even see that yellow, depending on how opaque the color is that's going on top of it. So try laying the colors both ways. There's a chart that I'm going to show you that does that exercise, so you can check your whole palette and see what it looks like. Here's an example of what mixing looks like compared to what glazing looks like. This is just a layer over a dry layer of two different colors. And this is mixing those same colors. Now you can see that my photography of this is off, so this looks grayer altogether. But some of these are obviously different. If you look like, for example, this color and this color, they look very different when you've done the mixing versus glazing. So you can get different colors just by how you mix or blend or combine those pigments, how you lay them on the page. Exercise 4, create your own color wheel. We've done this in the color, last month was coloring, and we did this with pencils. And we've done this in the past with watercolors as well. And you can create a wheel. Now, this is an example of just doing a solid color of each of the colors, but you can do a gradient wash, and I'll show you an example of that when I do the demonstration. But just create like a mandala, and I like to have a few rungs in there so that I can have different values. And you can decide how you want yours. But this walks you through it. I'm going to do a little bit of some demonstrations and show you some examples. But hopefully this can walk you through if you're doing it on your own time. We're not going to have time to make a whole color wheel tonight. All right, and then the other exercise, number 5, is to neutralize. And that is taking those complementary colors and blending them together and seeing what you get in the middle of those two. So you can watch the whole process of subduing that color from its vibrancy down to that neutral or that gray or kind of black color, all the way to the other complementary color. So we're going to practice that as well. And this is just a description of how to do that, and I'll demonstrate that. Now, as far as finding your own color style, look around you, whether it's in your wardrobe, you're on your couch looking at colorful pillows, or your curtains, or wherever you find color patterns or color schemes, look at those and see what appeals to you. Some color schemes might just really not appeal. You may look at it and go, oh my gosh, I really don't like those colors together. And then you look at this and go, oh wow, those are just amazing. So you're going to find your own style, if you will, of color schemes that work for you, that you're attracted to. And really, you're the artist, so you can do anything you want that appeals to you. That's the bottom line. These are just guides to help you get you started, these complementary or harmonious color schemes, but really whatever speaks to you is correct. There's no really wrong answer here. But like I said, when you start mixing things together, you do need to be aware of what might create muddiness. All right, that's the end of the notes. I'm going to go ahead and switch over. There might be different versions of this, but
Yeah, totally.
this is the pocket wheel that I was talking about, and this rotates around. So it shows if I add red to any of these colors, it has a little window that shows what color that is. It has some of the lingo or the terminology here. It has the value scale, so you can compare this along with the colors to see what value that particular color is. Like this looks pretty close to that. If you squint, and that can help you see if the color matches. If they don't look that different when you're squinting, that's how you can kind of tell. And this on the other side has the tint, tone, and shade version of each of those colors as well. And it shows some of those harmonious color schemes and explains what those mean. So it has a lot of function for, for a pretty reasonable price. So I do recommend that. The first thing I wanted to show you, I talked about creating a swatch, a palette, your palette swatch sheet. This is mine, and it's just a basic gradient wash. And I have some information there for each of my colors. But what I did is, and what I recommend if it's possible, is create it in a way that it's aligned up with your palette. So that way you can directly go there and find quickly which color is which. So it really aligns right with my palette. I don't have to, count 3 to the right and figure it out. I can just easily figure out which color is which. And this particular one, I made it so it fits right in there. I have a tray that goes over the top of that, and I can close it. But other palettes are different. But the more you can match the layout of your palette, the easier it'll be to find what the colors look like when you're ready for them. Now, the one I'm going to demonstrate how to do the swatch on is with this little Cotman. Now this is a student quality. Let me get my camera's kind of being wonky. Okay, so this is a student grade of Winsor and Newton. And one thing you'll notice when you look at the colors, if you look at the color indexes on these colors, you'll find that a lot of them are named with hue. So it might say Cadmium Red hue or Alizarin Crimson hue. And what that means is that it's an assimilation of Alizarin Crimson. It's not going to be the pure pigment Alizarin Crimson. And oftentimes when you see that with the student grade, that means that it's just probably to save a little cost in creating it. So for example, normally if the Cadmium Red, for example, would have one color index. But in this case, they basically mixed these two probably more inexpensive minerals together to assimilate this Cadmium Red. Whereas my Cadmium Red, now this is the pale hue, my Cadmium Red over here is PR 108. So that's probably just a more expensive mineral to get. And in order to keep the cost down for student grade, they decided to mix these two colors to assimilate a color that's like that color. But it's probably not gonna, it's not gonna match. It's not gonna match perfectly. But the other thing that's important to know about that is when you try doing color mixing, those mixed color hues are going to add complication when you start trying to mix the colors, because you might end up getting muddier colors as a result of that. So just be aware, it's not critical. It doesn't mean that you can't use them, but it's better to use a single pigment color than it is to use a mixed pigment color when you're trying to mix, because you're just getting more and more impurities as you mix those colors together, if that makes sense. So I'm going to demonstrate creating this little color swatch with one of these colors. And then I will demonstrate some mixing with both my M-gram and these, so you can get an idea of how those are different. And it's mostly, I'm telling you this just so you can set some expectations, not so you'll go out and, oh my gosh, I got to go buy professional. But I just want you to be aware of if you get something that's not what you expect, because it may not be you that's the problem. It may just be limitations in whatever you're using. Okay, I'm gonna back this up so you guys can see. All right, so I think I'm gonna do just, actually I'll do this ultramarine color here, just because it's nice and dark. And this kit, it's a travel kit, and it does come with a brush, but this brush is more like a lip liner. It's great for some detail, be okay for some detail, but it's not great for washes. And the other challenge is when you put this cap on it, it bends those bristles. It's hard to get those bristles to stay where they're supposed to be. So I don't love the brush, but it's a nice little travel palette. Okay, so I'm going to just start with wetting my color here. And I'm going to try to get a nice little wash of it on my mixing tray. Now, this group of colors is my color palette. These wells that hold the color, those are part of my color palette. And then there's the palette that's for mixing. So it can get a little bit confusing, all the uses for palette, because it could mean the color selections you're using. It could mean what holds your colors, and then also where you mix. So I'm going to mix it in this area, get a nice, I want to get enough pigment down, and I want it really concentrated. So, all right. So now I've got some good color, and this is where I'm going to be putting it, this ultramarine. So I'm just going to start with the most concentrated. I'm going to run that across like I talked about before, making a gradient wash. I added a little water. I should angle this up a little bit. I'm dipping a little bit of water. A little bit of water. So I'm just making from dark to light so I can get an idea of all of the range that that color can do. Now, at the bottom, what I'm going to do, this is for, I need to let this dry for some of the other things that I have to do to it, the other tests. But the other thing that I'm going to do is create that diffusion test. So I'm cleaning my brush real well. I don't want any pigment in there, and I'm going to just make sure, normally I would let this dry before I do any of this, but I'm just going to make sure not to touch that line. I'm going to go really below that for time's sake. I just wet it with some water, and now I'm going to take my brush and get some real concentrated pigment, and I'm just going to drop that in right at the beginning. And I just want to see how far that's going to move. Now, part of how that's going to move is this paper. I'm using like mixed media paper, so it's not really moving much at all. And that has a lot to do with the paper as much as the paint. But if you're using, in order to do this test, if you're using the paper that you normally use, you're going to get a realistic example of how your pigment's going to move on that paper with that paint. So the important thing is that you're using what you would normally use. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and let that dry. But one thing I do want to point out is that, see how you can really see that black line under there? It's not masking it at all. So there's really very little opacity to this color. It's not hiding that black line at all. So that answers that question. The next thing that I want to do is lift. And I can usually want to wait till that dries. So I'm just going to put that aside for now, and we'll come back to that. All right, the next exercise that I wanted to show you is I want to just show you some mixing. And this is really helpful if you're not sure which colors in your palette you want to create a color wheel with. Because if you have several yellows, several blues, and several reds, it may be a little confusing which ones to use. And you may want to do more than one. What I would suggest is that you either try to go with, if you're just doing one, try to find the most neutral color that you have, like the most neutral yellow and most neutral as far as temperature goes, as you have in your palette. But also you could do all cool or all warm. Now, if we do this, some color mixing, let's see how I'm going to set this up so you guys can see what I'm doing here. All right, so I'm going to mix some colors from this palette here, and then some colors from this palette over here. And I just want you to see how these different colors mix together. Now, to mix on the palette, which I recommend when you're starting because it's just a little cleaner, typically. You'll notice if you look at in my palette, there's a lot of contamination, and I don't mind that, although when I'm trying to mix colors and get purity, that's not a good thing. One way that I can clean that up is I can just take a clean brush and I can just basically kind of wipe off the contamination area. And see, now I've got a clean spot on that paint, so I can get some nice, good yellow there. Okay, so this is my, I think I want to use the Cadmium Yellow, which is this one here. And that's going to be similar to this cadmium, in theory, this Cadmium Yellow over here. I think that one is, let's see, this is the Cadmium Yellow. And this is of the Cotman, and this is the Cadmium Yellow for my M gram. And they are both, or no, this one's not Pigment Yellow 35. So this one is just one pigment. It's a single pigment, Pigment Yellow 35. And the Cadmium Yellow in the Cotman is Pigment Yellow 97 and Pigment Yellow 65. So they have the same name, but they're made up of different things. So it's just something to be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to just start with putting some of this one Actually, I'm going to bring this, I'm going to use this one for this. I'm just going to put some of that yellow on there. Try to make it as saturated as I can. And I'm actually going to make 2 pools of this yellow. Okay. And now I'm going to take my 2 reds. I have kind of a warm and a cool red. This is a cadmium red, and this one looks really orange to me. But I'm going to go ahead, and I didn't leave a lot of room over here. I'm going to put, yeah, it looks really, it's very, very warm red. I'm going to put that over there. On that side of this yellow. And then I'm going to put some of this pink color. It's more Alizarin Crimson. This is a more rose. So can you see how if you added a little bit of blue to red, you get kind of a rosy color, magenta color, and that's what that looks like. So this is the cooler red, that's the warmer red. Hopefully you guys can kind of see that. It takes practice to start seeing it. All right, now I'm going to mix them together. So over here, I'm going to mix some of that yellow and that cadmium red. And I want to see what I get, that interim color. What does that look like? And then I want to mix these 2 and see what those look like. Just getting an idea of which primaries I want to work together, which ones I think would make better partners in doing a palette, like a color wheel. All right, now over here, I have some more of my yellow, and I'm going to take my 2 tones of blue. I'm going to lay them on either side of the yellow. This is the ultramarine, more of a cool blue, I think, and then maybe that's the warm one. I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to tell. I think that's ultramarine. Oh, that's intense blue. This is ultramarine. So this is the warmer one over here. Okay, so now I'm mixing that with my yellow. I want to be getting green. And then I'm going to mix this side. Now, neither of those greens I love, if I'm honest. They look kind of muddy. See how they're kind of muddy? I don't love that. I think the yellow and the reds, both of those worked out just fine, but I'm not really that, I'm not loving the blue yellow mixes of that one. Okay, now let me just try this paint over here and see if I'm happier. Oh, I want to use the cadmium. Now you can see already that this pigment is picked up a little bit easier because it's just a softer. These are already hardened when I get them. These are the pans. And so they're just a more solid paint. So it takes a little bit more to work them loose, whereas this is honey based and it just comes up pretty easily. So I don't have to scrub in there. If I do that, it's gonna take more pigment than I need. All right, so then I'm gonna take a little bit more of that and put that over here. All right, now I'm going to take I'm going to take a couple blues. So I have an ultramarine and I think I'm going to do my Phthalo Blue. So I want to make sure. So that's my Phthalo Blue. And this is my warm side. You can just already see the vibrancy of that color. It's just, you know, it's more, I don't want to be, I mean, there's a reason that you pay extra. That's all. That's all I'm trying to say. So much easier to get that pigment going. Okay. And my ultramarine over here. Okay, now I'm going to mix those. That looks kind of muddy to me too. Ooh. That one likes to mix and mingle. I like that green much better. So these two might be the combination I want to use. So if I'm going to pick, yeah, I like this green much better than that green. That looks more muddy. And it could be because maybe this is a warm yellow and that's a cool blue and they just don't really mix as well. So now I can get an idea. Okay, I really like those. I like that blue and that yellow. Let me see which pink I like best. It's good to know all of them. You could do multiple color wheels, but if I want to know which ones are going to give me my best primary colors, this is just one way to figure that out. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my Alizarin Crimson, my cool red. I'll put that on this side. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Contamination. This one really likes to travel. That color, the phthalo blue, likes to travel. That is a characteristic of phthalo blue. It likes to poach in pickleball terms. Okay. Gotta watch them. They like to party on the palette. Okay. Got some Alizarin Crimson. Now I'm going to take my Cadmium Red. And now I'm going to just mix a little bit of that with my yellow. I think typically red and yellow played pretty nice together, you know, usually, but not always. I think that doesn't look too bad. However, because I feel like this color goes better with that blue, but we'll find out because we're going to mix that in a minute. So now I want to bring some of this yellow over, see how this color looks. So this is just a way you can explore well, that's doing something interesting over there. I don't even know. You guys can see that there's like a chemical, some kind of chemical reaction. Let's see if I want to Look at that. Interesting. I don't know what that's about. Oh, see, now this guy's going over here again. So I think either of those reds work with the yellow. And now I want to find out which red and blue is going to go together. I suspect these two would probably be okay and these two would be okay. But since I like this blue better for my green, I think I'm going to try this one with the Alizarin Crimson. But I'm going to try it with both of them. So I'm going to get a new palette because this one's already mixing and mingling there. Look at that. I mean, it's going to mix together and become black eventually. Okay. So now I want to mix my Alizarin Crimson. Oh, something. Helps if I actually get the right one. Did you have a question, David, or did you just become unmuted accidentally?
Exited, sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring you. You had a question? Okay. So Alizarin Crimson. Let's see. How that goes with that blue compared to the other red. So I think we could go either direction of the reds, but I really liked that Phthalo Blue. So I'm going to go with the Phthalo Blue. See if I can keep it under control. They don't put too much on the palette. Won't spread around. Okay, and then I'm going to take some of my Cadmium Red. And that is the warmer red, and the Phthalo Blue is, well, it is actually the warmer of the blues compared to the ultramarine. So, well, they might like this one better. I don't know. So I want to get a violet, right, for my secondary color. I want to get a violet. So I want to see how these guys play together. All right, let's just mix these two. See what I get. That's looking pretty brown so far. Kind of a wine color. And then let's see what these guys, make sure I rinse my brush real good. That's the one thing you want to make sure when you're doing these color mixing. You got to make sure that you get all that pigment off the brush, or else you're going to be contaminating your colors. I feel like these two are going to be happier together. Let's see. Yeah, I like this color better than, that's looking muddy to me. And this is looking more like violet. So that means I've now found my three colors that I would want to use for my primary wheel. And that's the Phthalo Blue, the Alizarin Crimson, and was it the I think it was the Cadmium. Yeah, I think I just used the Cadmium Yellow. I didn't try multiple yellows. So it was the Cadmium Yellow. So those are the three colors that I would say are going to give me probably the prettiest options. Like I said, this is pretty muddy. And of course you can't really see these very well now, but this wasn't that great looking. I think both of the pinks looked good with the yellow. And now let's mix all of those together and see what kind of black mess we get. And of course, you know, if I add more blue, it's going to get, you know, you got to get the right mix, but you're going to get, if it's more red, it's going to be more brown. And if you add more blue, it's going to get more gray. So, but see, you just kind of get mud. So this is what happens a lot when people are first learning watercolors. They don't wait till things dry. They maybe scrub too much on the page and they mix too many colors, and very quickly you can go from these beautiful colors to mud if you're not careful. So it's just important to understand how that works. If you don't let things dry, if you try to mix too many colors together, especially if you're mixing all the primary colors together, you're going to just end up with some mud. Let me just put this on paper so you can see what that looks like. Yeah, it's kind of like a raw umber. And this isn't a bad color if you're trying to create rocks or trees. But if you're trying to make a garden and you accidentally mix that red and the green, you don't want it to look like that. So it's just the awareness of what can happen. All righty. So I've showed you mixing on the palette, and I do want to show you mixing on the page. So if I were to take, for example, I'm just going to pick two of the colors that I liked. I like the Alizarin Crimson. And let's say I put that on my page. And then I want to create kind of a violet, but maybe I want it not to be a real blended violet. Maybe I want it to be kind of violet-y. Then I'm going to take that phthalo blue and I can drop it in. And I can blend it on the page. Look at some interesting chemistry going on. Look at how much that phthalo blue wants to just run wild. So you're going to see some areas that are going to be blue and some areas that are going to be alizarin. But I could also, if I really want to mix those colors, I can just do it on the page. Now they're all blended together. And that's going to look different. So it depends on what you're going for. Another thing I can do, and this you have to be careful with because you can contaminate your colors, but let's say I wanted to mix an orange color. I could go into, always start with the lightest color, but I could go in and load my brush up with some yellow. Oh, it still has some blue on it. Let me get my brush real clean. I think I need to get new water because my water's starting to get kind of muddy too. Let's see if we can get some clean. There we go. Okay, so I got some yellow on my brush, and I can then go to the darker color that I want to mix it with. Let's say I want to just mix it with some of this red. Now just know that I might put a little bit of yellow in that red, and I don't mind a little bit. Some people will mind it a lot, but now I have both the yellow and the red on my brush, and I can take it to the page and I can just kind of mix it as I'm placing it down, and I get a nice orange color. So that's mixing it on the palette, mixing it on the page, and then sort of mixing it brush and page together. Now let's talk about glazing. That's the next one. And yes, glazing. Okay, so how glazing works is, and I'm going to do the first part of the glazing because I have to let it dry, and then I'm going to show you that lifting technique for the first project that we were trying to do while we let that dry. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pick whatever color it is I'm going to work with for the glazing. Let's start with Well, let's do a red and yellow and see what happens. So I'm just going to pick up the Cadmium Red. And I want to make sure it's on my brush evenly. Okay, so I'm just kind of mixing it in my brush real well. And then I'm just going to create a line across the page. That's pretty, I want a little bit, it's pretty diluted. I want a little stronger color. There we go. Okay, so I created a line of that color on the page, and I'm going to be mixing it with a yellow. So I'm going to just do cadmium yellow since I've been working with that. And we established that cadmium worked okay with the cadmium red. So let's do some cadmium yellow. I'm also going to make a line of cadmium yellow. Okay, so there's my two lines. I'm going to put those aside and let them start drying. And you can do this with each of your colors. And I'll show you, actually, I'll show you that example right now. So with my palette, what I did is I took all of the colors in my palette, and these are all the colors. So it's basically a grid of the same colors. And I did some washi tape, some skinny washi tape, divided it out into the sections for all my colors. Now I would recommend probably not bothering with any of the neutral earth tones or anything like that. They're all going to be kind of muddy, so I wouldn't do it with those. But you just write the list of all your names, the same list of names, and then you do a line across of each of the colors, and then after it dries, you do the line across this way, each of the colors. So this color right here is going to be the two colors that are the same that are layered over each other. So obviously it's not going to look any different, right? And like this whole line in the middle is just going to be the colors that you're starting with. But these other ones are going to be two different colors, and they're going to start changing. And you're going to see with your palette how many different colors you can get with your palette. So even if you only had 6 colors or 12 colors, you could see all of the combinations you can get just by layering or glazing over the top of each other. These are not mixed, these are glazed, like what I'm showing you right now. You can also do the same chart by mixing as well. Okay, now let's see if I can do this without messing up the other thing, because it's on the same journal pages. Maybe I'll just tear this one out, actually. Okay, so I'm back to this little test page. Now this is not great paper, so I'm not sure how it's going to handle lifting, but I'm going to give it a go. And I'm going to use my little, no, that might not be able to handle. I'm going to just use the same brush. I'm going to make sure it's really clean, and that might mean I have to go get new water. Let me see. I want it just barely damp. I want to get it as thirsty as I can, meaning it's going to be, get off as much water as I can, but I don't want it dry out of storage. I want it to, I always sort of wet my brushes first, but this one I want it just barely damp. And I'm going to just try to activate that pigment and lift it off. That's why it needs to be a little bit damp, because you need to activate it and lift. So you can see that this is not a permanent color, meaning it does not stain the page. I'm able to get down back to white. If I tried that with probably this Alizarin Crimson, for example, and I tried to lift it, I'd probably still be really pink under there. I would probably lift some of the pigment, but not all of it. So that's an example of seeing the permanence. Does it stain the page or can you lift the pigment? And it's a nice technique that you can use to lift the pigment. You can create highlights if you want, or create clouds by lifting the pigment while it's still wet, things like that, if you have the ability to lift. And this one would allow me to do that. Doesn't move a lot, at least not on this paper. There's the dark to light, and it's not opaque in any way, and it's not permanent. So that tells me a lot about this particular paint. I think while I'm still letting those dry, I'm going to start with the next exercise, which is creating a color wheel. So we've decided what 3 colors we want to use for our wheel. Now on the handout, I have a step-by-step. If you're going to be mixing completely on your palette, what I would recommend trying that first. I'm going to kind of demonstrate a little bit of a shortcut, but if you do it completely on the palette first, then you can kind of look at all your colors and see what you're working with before you get to the paper. If you do it like I will demonstrate, you're kind of working as you go along, and it may, you may run into troubles that way, but it's just a quick way to do a color wheel. And I haven't demonstrated it before, so I thought I would just basically show that. So the first thing I want to do is I already picked those 3 colors that I want to use, and that's going to be the cadmium yellow. So I want to make a good amount of each of the colors that I'm going to be using, and make sure I have enough. This, because this is honey based, it gets soft so quickly, and sometimes it lifts up too much pigment. So I have to be actually really careful with it. All right. Now, if you're mixing it completely on palettes, what you could do is you could create your primary mixes, and then you could transfer them to these little wells mixed. And maybe I'll just show that part of it. I'm not going to do the whole pie wheel, but maybe I'll just show you some of the mixing in this little palette. I think that's helpful, because the cool thing about watercolors, one of the many cool things, is even if this dried up, all I have to do to use it again is to add a little water. Like these are those wells that I did from the other night where I used the indigo, and I'm going to use those same ones for the Sunday class. So I just let them dry up. All I have to do is add water and they reactivate. So you don't have to rinse off your palette if you're working on a project and you have some leftover paint on your palette that you haven't used and it's a good color, it's not mud. Leave it, let it dry, use it later. You can really make it go a long way just by reactivating it later. So that's why I'm not really worried if that dries up a little bit. All I have to do is activate it with a little bit of water. Okay, so let me go back to, I think I'm probably good on my cadmium yellow. A good amount there. I'm not doing a really big project. Okay, now I want to mix up my red, and I decided that I'm going to use the Alizarin Crimson. I want to make sure that I mix them far enough apart that I'm not having them commingle like they did before. And if you have different wells, like this has separate wells, that can be helpful. It's just this only has 10 wells, and I'll be doing 12 colors ultimately. So it wasn't enough to do to include my primaries. So that's the reason I'm not doing all of them there. And now I'm going to get some of the blue. and it's the Phthalo Blue, which is very hyper, this color. Likes to move, as we've seen. Okay, so I'm going to put them way over here. No partying until I'm ready for you. Okay, so now I'm going to go, I've marked this with just a dry erase so I can kind of get an idea where I'm going with this. So I'm going to start with, I think I'm just going to start with my, I've already got my blue on the brush. So I think if I do the green first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my green well, because that's my secondary color. And I'm going to just put some of this, transfer some of this color in there. Now what you can do is you can use different brushes. So let's say you don't want to have to keep rinsing and you don't want to waste it. You can just use another brush to transfer the other color. That can simplify the process. Doesn't matter too much. I'm adding yellow. And I want about equal amounts of each of those colors, typically. So that looks pretty green. It's like a good green shade. I mean, part of it's eyeballing. You're not like getting exact measurements here, right? Okay, so now I want, on this side, I want some of this, I think I'm going to have to make up more, but I want some of this, this is going to be the green, and then I'm going to add the next primary color, which is blue. So I want some of this green over here. And then I want some of this over here. So see, I'm running out already. So I'm going to probably have to get more in here. I'm going to mix up enough so you don't run out, because you don't want to have to keep mixing, because you could end up with different colors. So now I already have the green on this. This one is green now, so I have to rinse it off to get more yellow. Think about working in the kitchen, mixing up a recipe. That's basically. All right, so I've got a little more of that green. I'm going to just put some more on this side and some more on this side. So I've got the green in the 3 wells. In this one, I'm going to add some blue. And I believe this is my blue. Okay, so I already have some blue. So I'm just going to add a little bit of blue to this side, and it's going to be more of the blue-green. Now I could be putting it to paper as we go along, but I think it's a good idea to just get them all mixed. You can kind of see your colors, and then you can make your wheel. And that way you're not problem solving on your project. And then this side is yellow-green, so I'm going to go ahead and add, oops, except for that I still have a little blue on my brush, so I have to be careful. Add a little yellow there. It's important to rinse really well. You can have a little piece of paper that you can do a sample on to see if you've gotten all your pigment out of there, because sometimes the pigment sticks more than others. Like this blue is just not wanting to come off of there. So, all right, let's see if I can. All right, so that's more of a yellow green. Not sure what all that sounds are. Okay. And then now we have orange is the next secondary color. So let me get all of that green and blue off of there. And now I want to mix some of that yellow over here. Oh, it's already green. Still contaminated. That's not going to work. Let me get my brush really cleaned. And that's why it's good to do this in your palette first, instead of on the paper, because one contamination is going to change how that's going to look. All right, I think I'll put all out of there. I'm going to go ahead and come into my fresh yellow just to make sure I get enough. And this is why it's really important to have those two. And you can even have 3 water wells if you want. If if you're doing this project and you just find it's hard to keep your brushes clean, you could have 3 water wells. So have a dirty, medium, and really clean. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little bit of that red with my yellow, and that's going to give me orange. All right, because then I'm going to bring over some of that orange over here, some of the orange over here. Then over here, I'm going to be adding more yellow. And then over here, I'm going to add more red. So as you move along the wheel, you're just basically adding more of the next primary color that's on the wheel from where you're at in that direction. All right. Now the next one we're going to mix is the red and the blue to make our violet. A little bit of a process, but it is worth it in the end to see what your colors can do. It saves you from having to, buy a lot of unnecessary colors that you can mix. If you learn how to mix, it can really save you a lot of money in the long run. So it is time consuming to do some of these exercises to figure out your, your paints. But in the long run, it's going to save you time and energy because you'll just know the recipe. You already know how to get the recipe that you're looking for. All right, so this one, I'm going to add more blue to.
Can I ask a question, Shauna, while you're doing this? So let's say I want to make the Chargers colors, but you can't buy the specific color that they have. So I mean, can you actually take basic colors and somehow find out how to make the I'm trying to understand.
Well, that's the idea, is that you're going to be trying to move towards whatever color you're trying to make. Now, you're going to have limitations depending on what paint you have, right? And what your palette is. But for example, I can make all of these colors with my palette. That's a lot of different shades. And I mean, I wouldn't think, oh, I would maybe go buy this color because I love this color. But I don't have to go buy this color because I can make it if I use sunlit green and phthalo green mixed together. So when you do this, you'll see all the colors, and then you can take this chart and go, okay, the Charger colors is like this color and this color, and here's the recipe for that color, and you already have it. Now, this is a simple recipe. This is sort of 50-50, right? And just layering, but there's a range. You can add 1 drop of this, you can add 2 drops of this, you can add 3 drops of this. it's a
Yeah.
gradient. So you can, if you have, good primary colors, you can get a wider range of colors than you can even imagine. I've been showing the mixing part of it. If you're mixing directly on the mixing palette, and then now all my colors are there, they're ready to go, and I can put them on, I can create kind of like a ring of colors with them. All right, so I'm going to start with my primary colors. And I'm going to pick my Alizarin Crimson. And I'm just going to start it here. And then the next color that I want is going to be, let's see, I'm going to move to my, I'm going to follow this little chart here. But that's my red. And then the next color I want is my red orange. So I can go into my red orange and I can keep following the ring around. And then the next one is my orange. So I can go into my orange. And then I can go to my yellow orange. I'm just making a ring. And then my next one is my yellow. Then my green yellow. Then my green. Then my green blue. Then my primary blue. Like I said, this is sort of a shortcut version. And then, oh, I already did my blue green. And then there's my blue violet. My violet. And then my red violet. And then back to my red. So there's kind of a ring of the colors. It's not perfect because I'm kind of going quickly, but basically the whole color ring. Now, the second half of this is, like I said, to do the glazing, is to take those same colors that we were working with. I think I did the cadmium this time. This particular project. So I'm just loading my brush with the cadmium red kind of off camera here. I'm doing it in the well that this has a little space at the top of the well that's angled down to where the pigment is. And so I can mix just one color right there. So that's what I'm doing, getting a nice saturated brush. But I don't want too much, so I'm going to make sure to go to my mixing plate and just make sure I don't have any. Okay, now I'm going to go over the top of this yellow with the red. And not as saturated. I don't want to run it a second time because if I work too much on that yellow, if I start moving this around, for example, if I start going like this, that's going to lift some of that yellow pigment and it's going to mix them rather than layer them. So I really want to just do one brush stroke over the top. I don't want to be too heavy-handed with the brush. Okay, now I'm going to take that yellow, cadmium yellow, and I'm going to just do a brush stroke across the red. So you can see it's the same two colors, but layering them in different orders might look completely different. So with just two colors, I have created this tone and I've created that tone. So I can, and if I mix them together on the palette, I get an even different tone. So you can really go a long way with just a few colors. I mean, this is 3 colors right here, 3 colors. And I could go even further. I could mix a little bit more blue, a little bit more red. I mean, I can really incrementally, you can keep mixing colors and fine tuning it till you get what you like. With the pure pigment, you're going to get more pure mixes. You're going to get less muddiness. You can get muddiness with pure colors too, depending on what you mix, but you're going to get a little bit better quality when you mix the pure pigments. I do recommend that this is like, I don't know, 90 pound. So this is not the regular watercolor, but I figured I didn't want to waste my my quality watercolor paper for just doing some of these testing. And I recommend you don't do that either. I mean, when you're making your color wheels, I definitely would, if you're just practicing different mixing and stuff like that, use the most inexpensive paper just to practice. But if you're trying to see how your paint will behave on a certain paper that you're going to be using, like if you're testing it for the that movement like we did on that color swatch, then you do want to use the same paper that you're going to be using, because then it's going to be more like what you're going to be getting on your projects. So again, these are dried now, and you can see, this looks very different than this, even though those are the same two colors, because there's some opacity with that red. Now, I also wanted to show you, while I have this, and since it's dry, I want to do a lift test, a staining test on this red, because usually reds oftentimes are staining more so than some other colors. So I'm going to just try that here and see if I see what kind of lifting I get for this. Looks like it's going to lift. I think Alizarin Crimson is one of the staining. It's lifting, but not as much as that blue. See how that's staying red under there? It's not getting completely white. So, I mean, it's definitely lifting some, but you're not going to probably get to a white page underneath. Let's see what this does. See, I can lift that pretty good, but there's going to still be some pigment there. This is all three of those colors. Definitely some of that's going to stay. So you can kind of get an idea of how your paint's going to lift if you want to do something like, let's say I want to lift a sun out of a sunset and I'm using this red. I have to know that, the sun is going to probably keep some of that red pigment. And that's okay, as long as I'm aware of it. All right. I think I've covered most of what I want to do. I did want to try to do mixing with those Cotmans, but I think I illustrated that you're just going to get just the concept that you're not going to probably get as clean mixing when you're mixing colors that are multiple pigments to start with. You're just going to get a more pure mixing if you mix single pigment. So it's okay. It doesn't mean that you can't mix. It's just something to be aware of if you're having problems, just to know it's not you. It might be the pigment. Now, these reds, I think the red and yellow did really nice together. I think I had the biggest problem with those blues, and those were mixed pigments too. So it's really going to depend on what you're mixing and how well it behaves. Let's mix all of these together and see what kind of mud we get. A little different muddiness than the other one. I just wanted to see how that compared to this one. It's a little bit, there might be more red in the mix or whatever. Definitely looks a little bit more red there. But you're just going to get some, when you mix all those colors together, you're going to get a variety of shades of mud. So here's what those ones look like. This one had a little bit more green hues to it. This looks more like a lamp black. So you can mix your own blacks. You can mix your own grays. You don't have to buy those. You can mix earth tones. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Healing Art After Hours. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful. And as always, happy creating. Bye.